Old School Lane Casual Chats is brought to you by Old School Lane, producing various content from blogs, videos, and podcasts discussing about movies, TV shows, video games, and everything else in between since 2011. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Radio Public, Overcast, Breaker, Pocket Cast, and YouTube. We're associated with Channel Frederator, Manic Expression, The Comic Book Cast, and The Aaron Mehta Show.
Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side. Well, I paid a visit. While it's possible I missed it, it seemed different yet exactly the same. Till further notice, till further notice, I'm in between. From where I'm standing, my grass is green. Someone once told me the grass is much greener on the other side.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Casual Chats. I am Patricia, and I am here with these very special guests. So, joining me for the first time in almost 3 years, if you can believe it, Antoni Mateo Garcia. We did the Yu Yu Hakusho podcast, if you remember.
Hey, we definitely did.
And we actually have two new guests with us. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Sure, I'll go first. My name is Brooke Aaron Smith, and I co-host a podcast called Nation of Animation, which is a cartoon book club podcast where we talk about cartoons.
And hi, I'm Ryan Stevens. I am the other co-host of Nation of Animation, and Brooke actually explained what it was, so I don't have to say anything else.
Well, that's okay. But thank you guys for coming on by. And so today we're going to be talking about the 2000 Nickelodeon animated series As Told by Ginger, created by Emily Kapnick. Just recently, it celebrated its 21st anniversary. I know it's weird considering that, you don't usually celebrate 21st anniversaries of anything unless you drink alcohol, but that's beside the point. Anyway, but nonetheless, I still wanted to come by and do this podcast in honor of this show because I absolutely love it. It's one of my favorites, and I feel like it needs more attention than it gets, but I decided to have these guests on by to talk about it because you guys have done discussions of it in the past, and I definitely want to hear your takes on it. So for those who don't know what the show is about, it features a teenage girl named Ginger Foutley and her friends Dodie Bishop and Macy Lightfoot as they go through their everyday troubling issues at Lucky Junior High. Ginger has a brother named Carl. Dodie has a brother named Hoodsy, where they're best friends, and they deal with their elementary school issues, and they're the ones who cause a lot of mischief and trouble. And so essentially the show is a typical slice of life show that you would see where the characters are going through their everyday struggles. But in this one, it's a bit different in terms of it having a continuing story arc, and characters would be having a different sets of clothing, and the characters would be growing and changing and getting older as time goes on. And, along the way, they go through their ups and downs, whether it be through relationship problems or whether it be through trust issues or various other things. So the show only lasted for 3 seasons, ending its run. It's kind of difficult to say because some people say it's 2004 where, the episodes kind of stopped for Nickelodeon. Some people say it's 2006 when the episodes kind of aired on the Nicktoons network. Some people say that it kind of ended around 2009 when the rerun stopped airing. I mean, it's difficult, but we'll get to that in just a moment. But it's a very impactful show, in considering the fact that it is the only, as of the making of this podcast, the only Klasky Csupo animated show that was not created by either Arlene Klasky or Ergobor Csupo. Emily Kapnick created this, and she would go off and to create other shows such as Suburgatory, Selfie, and just recently Splitting Up Together. And so this is the only animated show that she ever created because she leaned more towards doing live action stuff. And other shows that people would be a part of, like Jared Faber, who also did the music, would also be a part of doing the music for a lot of Emily Kapnick shows, like mentioned Suburgatory, Selfie, and Splitting Up Together. And the voices of the characters would consist of Melissa Disney, who is the voice of Ginger, Aspen Vincent, who's the voice of Dodie, and Jackie Harris Greenberg, the voice of Macy, and various other voice actors that you probably know, such as Kath Soucie and Tress McNeil and Jeannie Elias and various others. So Yeah, I'd like to know from all of you guys, what was your history of As Told by Ginger? How did you first get introduced to it?
Well, I'll say I actually wasn't allowed to watch it growing up. This is silly. Looking back, it gets sillier every day. But I remember watching the pilot, and in the pilot episode, Ginger is encouraged by local mean girl Miranda to steal like a bank sign for the popular girl Courtney's birthday. And my parents were like, "This show is about stealing. You're not allowed to watch it. No more." So one strike and you're out. So I really spent most of my life not having seen much of As Told by Ginger. I knew about it sort of culturally because everyone else had more reasonable parents who would let them watch it. And like I knew of the characters and I knew that Carl, looked the way he looks. But I really didn't watch it until like later in life. And I was like, I'm living on my own and I can sort of, be in charge of what I watch and see what the deal on that As Told by Ginger show is about. And I really immediately was like, wow, this is really good. It's really mature and reserved in its storytelling, and it really has some neat nuanced characters and is doing things that a lot of other shows at the time, and I would say still today, and like animation primarily aimed at kids, doesn't do. So I'm late to the party, but I'm definitely here at the party now.
Yeah, I watched it as it aired. I wasn't quite the age of the characters yet. I was a little younger when it was first coming out. So they all seemed very old and mature, and their problems were very old and mature problems to me at the time. I didn't see it in order, though. I saw it in order for the first time last year. But I was pleased to see that I had seen most of the episodes before, which was great. I hadn't missed out on anything. I was always a fan, and I think I'm an even bigger fan now as an adult who can sort of appreciate their coming of age stories more.
I first encountered the show when I was about 8 years old, and it was through the Nickelodeon website. And when I saw the picture of As Told by Ginger through the array of shows that were being aired at the time, which was about 2000, I was quite interested in it until it aired back in 2001, where I was living in the Philippines. And when I caught my first episode of As Told by Ginger, which was Cry Wolf, I was immediately immersed in the show. Granted, I was only 9 years old and a third grader during my first serious viewing of As Told by Ginger, but with each and every consecutive viewing of this underrated classic, especially now speaking as a grown-up, I can definitely say and affirm that this show manages to hold up very well. I managed to really get myself into what the characters were undergoing as they were growing up. I was able to relate to their struggles and their triumphs. And every time I watched them on screen, I felt like I was watching people I knew, whether they be my friends or my family members or just random people I knew from school. I felt like these were the people that were kind of speaking to me, and I was speaking with them in a sort of interesting interchange of dialogue and in everything that they went through, both in their lives as children and even where the adults were concerned. So it's a very wonderful show that I'm still proud to call myself a fan of.
Yeah. As for me, I first got introduced to it when I was 14. This was when I was in high school, and around the new millennium, Nickelodeon was definitely going into a new direction, leaning more towards like, okay, our audience is growing up, and so we need to be able to cater to shows that are very similar. And so I remember when As Told by Ginger was airing, and this was kind of like around the time when I was kind of like slowly drifting myself away from Nickelodeon. I was getting into like my anime phase where I was watching more stuff on Toonami and Adult Swim. And so then I saw that there was a commercial for it, and I was like, oh, I definitely am interested in watching it. Unfortunately, I was like the only one because I used to, in high school, hang out with this, group of wannabe goths, and, they would be like into like punk clothes, and they'll be like listening to like, Green Day or Evanescence or Good Charlotte. And they were so into like Johnny the Homicidal Maniac or Squee or anything that Jonah Vasquez wrote. And they were so into Invader Zim. And so when I talked to, my friends saying, hey, there's this show called As Told by Ginger, we should check it out. And then they were like, nah, it's about a girl who goes to school and I'm going to school. Why would I be watching that? It's like they needed some sort of escape. And so I kind of enjoyed watching it myself for pretty much 15 years until I did the my YouTube series of videos discussing about As Told by Ginger in honor of its 15th anniversary that I did 5 years ago. And then for the first time ever, I really started to see the fan base coming out. And that was like a really amazing experience for me. So the fact that I kind of like had to like sit through this alone, where in a lot of shows cases, I would be like, oh, I knew a group of people who were familiar with it. So yeah, I guess it was kind of like my show that I was like enjoyed by myself before, the internet, made me enjoy it with a bunch of other fans. So yeah. Anyway, so going into that, I'm actually curious for all of you guys. I always like to, whenever I'm talking about a show in my podcast, I always ask questions about, who are your favorite characters, episodes, moments, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'd like to start that off. Who's your favorite character?
I think, I was thinking about this a lot this week, and I think my favorite character overall is probably Miranda, and she's obviously one of the quote unquote villains at a lot of times during the show. But I think she's so smart and so funny, voiced by Cree Summer, who I love, like in Rugrats as Susie, and recently she had a multi-episode arc on What We Do in the Shadows on FX. And I think she's wonderful. I love every character she voices. And I think Miranda is very realistic. She reminds me of people I knew in high school or middle school even. And that she's one of the funniest characters, and I always enjoy it when she's in any episode.
Yeah, I mean, I even said this in my my top 15 As Told by Ginger's episodes list, that Miranda was able to do something in the first episode that Princess Azula couldn't do to Iroh and Zuko throughout season 2, have them arrested. And so the fact that she was able to have Ginger arrested in the first episode, it's like, yeah, she's like the classy villain right there.
That's the scheme that kept me from watching the show when I was younger. So really effective scheming there.
Yeah, Miranda was definitely a person that I definitely enjoyed watching, because if you overlook just how Machiavellian she can be, you could also realize that she is hilarious in a snide and sarcastic sense, with a hint of cynicism, because with every word or lexeme or expression that she has, they're all dripping with biting sarcasm, and you cannot escape from her. And props have to go to Cree Summer for imbuing this particular character with so much dryness and so much dark wit that you cannot really contain it in just one box. And that's what makes Miranda really awesome in my own right.
Yeah, I mean, she has some of the most like notable one-liners in the series, like, let me pretend I care, okay, I'm done, or, oh, Ginger's mom's cleaning houses, I wonder if she does windows, or, this piece of gossip is too hot to keep cold. So yeah, she definitely has some of the best lines.
Let's not forget about her evil laugh. I mean, she could give the Wicked Witch of the West's evil laugh a run for its money.
Yeah, absolutely. And Cree Summer does, carry that, absolutely. And the fact that she's able to just, portray it in such a menacing manner, when, a lot of the stuff that she was doing for Klasky Csupo was definitely a lot lighter. She was the anti-Angelica in Rugrats, she was the nice girl. And so her playing as the mean girl was definitely just shows you about how fully ranged that she is in terms of her acting. Speaking of Cree Summer, she was one of the 3 people who sung the theme song right before they settled on Macy Gray.
Speaking of Cree Summer, what's also fascinating about her was that aside from Miranda and Susie, she also voiced Princess Kida from Disney's Atlantis in 2001 during her tenure as Miranda.
Right.
So you can definitely tell just how surprisingly versatile she was. I mean, think about it. She could voice boys, she could voice young ladies, an awesome warrior princess like Kida.
And
You
wouldn't this have
couldn't ask for
overlapped?
anything more.
Wouldn't this have overlapped with Kids Next Door? Because she was number 5 on that too, right?
I think Kids Next Door came out like, I mean, when did that pilot come out? The one with like the kid and the monkey, you know, that
Right.
yeah, that pilot that was like
one as well.
yeah, that I mean that I think that was like around the same time when that pilot was pitched, but I think that Kids Next Door might have came out like maybe a year or two later, but you're right.
Yeah, it came out somewhere in November 2002. It kept her busy.
I mean, yeah, that's the neat thing about us, like voice actors writ large, is there's this very like workman like go in the booth for however many hours a day, knock out however many roles, you know, clock in and clock out. And like the work ethic of voice actors, especially in this sort of era, and that still persists to today. But I think there's something really neat about seeing like the Billy Wests or the John DiMaggios or the Cree Summers and the like Tara Strongs of the world, who just like, yeah, I'm in every single thing you watched, and it's all me. And then I go home at the end of the day.
Yeah, I mean, that just goes to show you how versatile they are. I mean, you wouldn't believe it's like, oh wow, you know, this person did this voice and this voice and this voice, and oh, and they're, you know, they're appearing in this TV show, or they're releasing this album, because, you know, that would have been around the time at which, like, you know, Cree Summer was releasing her album Street Fairy like a few years before, and you know, she also, you know, did like tours with like what do you call it, like Lenny Kravitz and, you know, various other people. So yeah, I mean, she did a lot, and I mean a lot, in terms of like her career. So absolutely. Anyway, so yeah, Ryan, who's your favorite character?
It's tough. I go back and forth because I think that as far as main characters go, I think Ginger is a really well written one, and I think it's a smart character to like build the show around. I think Macy is a really appealing sort of the heart of that friend group. I know that Brooke also has a soft spot for Macy that I'm sure we'll talk about at some point.
I'm saving her for my favorite episode.
I see. But I think that my favorite one overall is Courtney Grippling, sort of the rich girl, which is, you know, unusual for me. And if people who listen to Nation of Animation know that, you know, that nation is not a capitalist nation. But I think, like, as far as rich characters go in media, Courtney is probably the best fictional rich person that I know of. I think her like cluelessness and her genuine desire to get better and to get more in touch with the world, and her dynamic with Ginger holds a lot of nuance and subtlety that I think they always manage to find a new spin on and find a way to really get to the core of that character.
Yeah,
and
you're
what she
right.
pulls out of Ginger every time.
Absolutely, because I mean, oh, go ahead.
I mean, speaking of the relationship between Ginger and Courtney, I've seen a lot of fan arts and a lot of fan manifestos where they would claim that Courtney had some type of crush on Ginger.
Yeah, I agree with that. I believe that. That's my headcanon too. Yeah,
I mean,
there.
I mean, I know that the fan base has definitely like shipped the two, and even though that Emily Kapnick did not confirm that this was like supposed to be a thing, but still the fans will do it. You know, that's what it is.
Yeah, I think we could have also witnessed our first openly lesbian couple as told by Ginger, and it could also be argued that Ginger would have also tackled her own thoughts about her own sexuality. Is she feeling more for boys? Is she feeling more for girls? I mean, that would have been a very interesting topic to have been dealt with, because with Courtney's really strong feelings for Ginger, it would have been also legitimized, and I would have loved to see Emily Kapnick and the team also tackle that.
That would have been really interesting. I think that if Ginger was released now, Definitely. I would definitely see that happening. But I think that, if the pilot was being done like around 97 and, it was finished by 98 and then the show was officially like produced in 99 and then it was released in 2000, I don't know if maybe that would have been possible because if you remember, that was when the murder of Matthew Shepard happened around maybe a year prior. And then we also had like, various other negative connotations of, various people from the LGBT community. Not I mean, even though we still have it kind of today, but not as much now. And I'm glad we're seeing shows such as like the Owl House and Adventure Time and Csupo that are like pro LGBT and showcasing that these relationships do exist. And with Legend of Korra, we wouldn't get that until that show happened. It took
That's
like
what I was about to remind you. Don't forget about Korra.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't until Korra in which we finally got that, and it took over a decade.
And even then, it's at the very end of the series. It's the final seconds of the final episode.
Unfortunately, it's to be expected. The same thing happened with Adventure Time too, in which Bubblegum and Marceline, now they're a couple, and it happened at the very last episode.
Gravity Falls 2 has the gay cops, which is a shame that their gay characters were cops, because that's sort of like giving with one hand and taking with the other. But the fact that Alex Hirsch has gone on record saying that Disney would not let him make it explicit, and so that was as much as he could get away with. I think it would have been neat for As Told by Ginger to go there. I don't think it was in the sub. I think we as fans can impress upon it, and I think Courtney's like earnest, sincere infatuation with Ginger as a person living in different means can easily be read as romantic interest. I don't think we need to insist that Emily Katnick had this secret agenda that Nickelodeon wouldn't have let her do. They definitely wouldn't have, and even today it would probably be hard, but it's nice to dream. It's nice to imagine.
Sure, but the fascination that Courtney had was in terms of like, she lives in this middle class environment, and she is not a rich girl, but at the same time, she has friends and they do all these activities together that she's never heard of, and she wants to be a part of it. She is genuinely curious, which is why in Carl and Maude, she brings her camera over to take pictures of her room. That's why in Sleep On It, that's why she invited her over to the sleepover so that she can learn how to do sleepover. So she's just more curious than anything.
All these things that definitely also do read as intimate, of like, let me take photos of your room, please come to my sleepover, like let me learn how you speak, let me learn your gingerisms. These are all things that get turned into fan fiction and get turned into 20-year-old fan theories, and God bless it for that. That's great.
Sure. All right. What about you, Antoni?
Well, as much as I love and can relate to Ginger, who is one of my favorite characters, Lois Foutley, Courtney Grippling, Carl, Ginger's brother, Hoodsey, and Orion steal her thunder. They definitely do so. Oh, unless I forget about Maude and to some extent Darren. But if I were to say my top 3, I would definitely go, or actually top 5, I would just definitely go with Orion, Lois, Carl, Courtney, and I almost forgot about Noelle. I could not believe I forgot about Noelle. Yeah, Noelle is definitely my number 5. So there, you have my top 5 most favorite characters As Told by Ginger, who managed to steal her thunder. Yeah, even though Ginger is the main heroine, there were definitely 5 others who managed to steal her thunder. That is just how strong the show is, because not only did it focus on Ginger, but the other characters that I definitely felt for. I mean, even though Orion was sort of meant to be, in theory, a rebound boyfriend for Ginger after Darren dumped her, which unfortunately happened because Ginger was in detention because of sleeping in class. I found Orion to be a very fascinating, down-to-earth, very chill type of person who seems to have no agenda, no ulterior motives, and he just seemed to be a naturally caring guy. And there are a lot of people who said that the natural thing for Ginger to have done was just simply move on from Darren and be with Orion. So that's Orion for you. Noelle, she definitely is someone who might be weird and eccentric at first, but she's so crafty and so intelligent and wise beyond her years. I especially love the chemistry between her and Carl. It is just so charming. Lois, I have this to say, one of my most favorite TV moms of all time. She totally ranks up there with the likes of Aunt Viv from Fresh of Bel-Air and Claire Huxtable from The Cosby Show. Finally, Hoodie. What more can you say about those guys? I salute Carl for being absolutely intelligent and articulate for his age, despite him being this type of gross boy. But that's sort of the surface. That someone who's so brilliant and sort of like an old soul, and Hoodsy's just a plain sweetie. And special kudos also has to go to Ms. Sorsky for being an awesomely wonderful teacher. I would have loved to have her as one of my teachers as either a middle schooler or a high schooler. She's just so eloquent and just so graceful.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are great characters. And I know I've probably said this like a billion times, but for those who are new to my podcast, yes, my favorite character in As Told by Ginger is Lois. I love her mannerisms. I love how supportive she is. I love that she can be very strict in her ways, but also she is doing it because she knows what's best for her kids. I mean, she's a single mom. She works as a nurse, which is incredibly stressful, especially now with what's going on with this pandemic that we're going through. And also, I think that, she's able to understand what Ginger's going through, even though that Ginger doesn't think that she does, because she thinks that, she's the mom and she doesn't know what she doesn't think that she understands her troubles and her awkward moments. But no, she is just as understanding because she went through that herself, and she's able to give her some great advice, and she's also able to give her all the support that she needs. And some of the best moments are where Ginger and Lois are together. And I think that with with moms, you're right, I do agree, Antoni, she is one of the best moms featured on television. And I also just commend Lorraine Newman for doing a fantastic job as playing as Lois, with giving her that New England accent, and being able to bring out the character in a way that is kind of interesting, like a very interesting take on what you would see for a single mom. Because usually when it comes to like single moms, it's always like they're barely around, or they're just really really strict, or anything of the sort. But no, she's able to become really supportive, and she's able to become, even with Carl, she has to put up with him, but she still loves and respects for what he does and who he is. And she also goes through her own arc, where she tries to see if she can find a good dad for, Ginger and Carl, and even maybe a husband for herself. And she started off with Buzz and Miss Foutley's boys, and then she eventually starts dating Dr. Dave, and then it goes over to the last episode, The Wedding Frame. So yeah, she has an arc on her own, and she's just as developed as the other characters in the show.
We also have to give Dr. Dave his props.
Mhm,
We really
absolutely.
have to.
Yeah, for him being that supportive for Lois, and the fact that she already had 2 kids from a previous marriage, and Carl can be quite of a handful, but yeah, I mean, he's just as supporting as anything, and that's good. And the fact that Carl was able to respect him, because he didn't have a good relationship with his dad, as we saw from episodes such as and even Stephen Holiday special, Lesson in Tight Ropes, and 10 Chairs.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I also noticed. Jonas, he kind of went AWOL in Carl's life, and I could understand the resentment he felt against him. And Jonas, even though he was trying to build a firm relationship as father and son with Carl, it just felt like too little too late. And that's what I also liked about Carl. He didn't really take crap from anyone, not even his own biological father, because despite him knowing that Jonas attempted to build a nice father-son bond between them, Carl still can't overlook the fact that their own biological father kind of walked out on his own family. And we see the stronger attachment that Carl has to Dr. Dave. And that's when I realized I could see why Carl respects him, because not only does Dr. Dave belong in the same medical field as Lois, but he knows well that this is a man who is very strong in his will and is very impassioned, not only in his career, who was earnest.
Mhm.
In fact, it's the earnestness that Dr. Dave has that makes Carl and Dr. Dave click in a sort of father-son way. And I definitely salute those two for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. So we got characters out of the way. So what were your favorite episodes?
My favorite episode, and this is why Macy is one of my very favorite characters, but I thought, well, I'll talk about her with my favorite episode because I think my favorite episode is Come Back Little Seal Girl. The song alone is obviously iconic and people still sing it, and I think it's so heartfelt.
Especially people named Brooke.
Yes, yes. It's just very touching. And I think it's a great example of, friendships that sometimes hit a little snag because obviously Ginger and Dodie in that episode feel like they're in a different place in their lives than Macy is. And Macy isn't afraid to just embrace the things that she loves, even if, people say that all the other kids are going to laugh at her. And that's something that I really love about Macy and something that, I think she holds on to throughout the whole series. And it really shines in this episode.
Yeah,
Also,
that's a fantastic episode. And the fact that, she was able to not put up with any stress or any tension from any of the students who are saying, oh, you're lame or you're a baby if you do this kind of talent for the talent show. Macy's like, I don't care. Do I look like a girl who's concerned enough with what's cool? She's not, because she is herself and she wants to rep that, which is awesome. I think that we all have that kind of thing in our lives where we feel like, oh man, if what I'm doing, is it like cool? Is it, should I do it in my age? And I think that, we all have that issue. It's like, do I, should I still wear this thing or should I still like this show because, it's not for my age range. So I think that the fact that Macy's like, who cares? Like what you like and don't let anybody talk to you about that. It's fantastic. And the song is, like you said before, is just a highlight for a lot of people. And a lot of people still remember it fondly to this day. It's like, when you think about like moments of As Told by Ginger, Come Back Little Seal Girl is the episode that people talk about.
there's this curious concept that comes up a lot in a lot of like kids media and like kids animation, which is the onset of adulthood, or like the need to grow up and to like put away childish things, where oftentimes characters will be like, oh no, I need to like act cooler and more mature because I'm a young adult, or like I'm growing up. There's like a line in the Recess movie where someone says like, next year, we're pre-young adults and next year we won't even be pre. And there's this almost like death drive-ish obsession sometimes of kid shows about growing up and how the kids watching it are also growing up. And I like, Come Back Little Seal Girl because it sort of rejects that. And, Macy's like, no, I'm not growing up that fast. I still like what I like, and I still want to be the little seal girl, and darn it all, I'm going to sing about it. And that insistence on being young when you're young is really exciting to see, especially the older you get. It's more exciting to see.
Yeah, I definitely enjoyed and really love Come Back Little Seal Girl because I can relate to it on a personal level, especially growing up from my preteen to teen years. I had a circle of friends and colleagues who thought that me still watching cartoons and anime is still so childish. And I'm like, they kind of perceived it as a bad thing. But, what some of them don't know is that not all cartoons are meant for kids. And there are cartoons that are intended for kids that have adult references, and there were even some that were just not made for kids at all, let alone intended for kids. So sometimes I did feel like I was the odd one out when it came to my interests, And especially when it came to like, you know, expressing the passion that I had for a lot of the shows I grew up with drawing fan art and writing motivational and demotivational posters and making memes about it, and just finding a lot of joy in what I was doing, and therefore sometimes a sense of catharsis, but also looking at a lot of the shows I grew up with in a little bit more of a critical eye than what I used to view it as a child. And Comeback Little Seal Girl is a firm reminder of making me see that no matter how old I am, I still love the stuff that I enjoy because they give me pleasure, they give me purpose, and they just make me feel happy. Sure, I'm pushing 30, but who says that I don't have to love the cartoons that I grew up with anymore, let alone the anime that I grew up with? I mean, if they make me happy, then it's great.
Well, I'm that you said it. You said it excellently, Antoni. I do agree. If regardless of how old you are, if you still enjoy it, then who's to say that you have to stop enjoying it? Yeah, my favorite episode, I think it's because of personal reasons. It's the third TV movie, Butterflies Are Free or No Turning Back. And the reason why is because when I was in high school, Ginger was graduating from middle school and going into high school, and I was doing a very similar thing. I was graduating from high school and going over to college, and she felt the very same fears that I was feeling. Like, oh man, I'm going to be going over to this different school. I'm going to be, meeting up with these different people. I'm not going to be meeting up with the same classmates. They're going to be going off and doing their own things. And so I was afraid too. And so, the fact that Ginger was going through the same fears, it's like, yeah, I was going through the same fears. And then you have the Carl and Hoodie plot where, they had to take their childhood things behind and put it into a time capsule. You have, Carl being pressured by Polly Schuster to put the petrified eyeball into the time capsule. And then you have him trying to become mature and trying to be less gross and trying to be less of a troublemaker and basically just putting that stuff behind. And it's a great correlation between the two. And you have Ginger with that amazing talk with her dad discussing about like how butterflies are a great example about the change and growth of a person. They have to go through that in order for them to fly. And then Carl has that really trippy dream where he's like constantly growing older. He's in the Red Room from Twin Peaks. And so you have these moments where I feel that it's just absolutely important in my life when I watched it at the time. And so it still means a lot to me to this very day that I was able to see something similar that I was going through, that a character that I really enjoyed was going through.
Yeah, and I love any episode where we get to see Ginger's writing talents come out. This one where she gets to write her beautiful speech, and then also Hello Stranger, where she gets to write her poem about her father.
Mm-hmm.
And, and it obviously all wraps up pretty neatly at the end when she has her own book reading as an adult. So I just love whenever that's highlighted as such an interesting part of her life and something that she's passionate about.
Yeah. And there's also And She Was Gone, when she wrote about the poem about the girl who wanted to go away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the moments where Ginger is writing in her diary and we get to like listen to her thoughts, and it definitely is very relatable, like talking about like, have you ever felt like you wanted something so badly that you just couldn't wait, and that when it's arrived, it's like maybe it wasn't the thing that you wanted. So yeah, it's everything that she thought of. It's definitely really relatable to a lot of people because I'm sure that they felt the exact same way as well.
Ryan, did you also have some favorite episodes?
I do. I mean, I have a lot of favorites. I can also boil them down to moments because I think that it's tough to like personally, I could I could give you a tight 10 on any on like one of like 5 or so episodes. So
Yeah,
why don't you
go for
ahead,
it.
Antoni. Yeah, I mean, I think that, it was already mentioned, but A Lesson in Tightropes, I think, is really stellar. One, because there is something really wild about like how many things happen in that episode. That is like Ginger, Ginger has had her heart broken by Darren because he was cheating on her. Also, her like tonsils or is it her tonsils
It's
or
her
appendix? Her
appendix.
appendix.
Appendix,
Sorry.
yeah.
I get them mixed up. Those things kids get removed in TV shows. Her appendix is bursting, and then her dad's back, and there's just a lot going on all at once. And that is how it is. I think it's neat for the show to be like, yeah, we're gonna have 3 crises all at once happening, because they're related, of course, so it's just tight plotting. But I think, like you were saying, Antoni, about how Carl and Jonas, that relationship is defined by Carl resenting his absentee father, and the fact that the show never is like, oh, in 20 minutes he's going to forgive him and they're going to love each other now. No, like that's like, I think that's Carl's finest hour in the series, is when he like holds out and resents his dad and like refuses to forgive him. But I think that Jonas as a character is a well-written like take on that experience of like the parent who leaves. He did a thing that has affected this family. He is also like a person with thoughts and concerns and emotions, and it doesn't forgive him for what he did, but it presents him as this 3-dimensional human being in a
And
really
I think it's
realistic
also
way.
great that Jonas is not an asshole,
He's
because
not evil, he just left.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think it's I don't know, something about Jonas kind of screams that he was clueless at worst, but negligent at worst. But
Mhm.
it's not like he was being awful. It's just that maybe his life's priorities got a bit out of whack.
Yeah.
And
That's not who he was. He wasn't going to be the dad. He wasn't going to be the present father. It's just not him.
yeah, I think there's just something within Jonas that probably made him say maybe his priorities weren't really there when he thought that this relationship with Lois would have worked, when he had the first daughter, and then all Ginger could remember from from her biological father is just seeing his leg.
Right, the photo of his leg, and
It's
that's
just,
it. Yeah,
it
because
just
he
kind of
legged it
makes
on
me
out of there.
realize, it just kind of makes me realize that. And also worth mentioning, I don't know if Jonas is slightly younger than Lois or if they're of the same age, but something tells me that maybe he felt like he was a bit too young and naive to know anything about being a parent, let alone a father. So maybe he just thought that it was not meant for him. So maybe that's why he left. And that's why this kind of caused this rift between Carl and Jonas. I think it was really all on him. And it's kind of hard not to feel bad for Jonas at all.
Right, and while at the same time like realizing that like, yeah, this whole family just is people, and life is complicated like that. There is not a there's only one Miranda in your life, Ginger. Like there aren't any other like schemers in the world. So like that one, I on the other hand, complete opposite, I Spy a Witch, where they have the Crucible the musical, and like they summon Maud's ghosts, which is just utter nonsense. Fun. Just get in there and have some fun, kids.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's also interesting because, from what we've seen in Losing Nana Bishop, where we saw like the old, family videos where, Jonas was into like doing home movies, and he had all this, he was like obsessed with animals, and he had like, like a pet ferret, and he had like a dog and stuff like that. And maybe they were young, maybe they were like in their early to mid 20s, and maybe they didn't know anything about having, the responsibilities of marriage and having kids. So maybe that pressure just eventually just like collapsed. And we even saw in like clips and moments from The Wedding Frame that Jonas was going through a lot, in which like he didn't have a lot of money in his credit cards, and he was overdue with his bills. So he's been struggling, like he was desperately struggling with trying to keep things afloat. So we don't know a lot about what happened between the two of them. And even with like the strained relationship, you can definitely tell that, they don't exactly love each other anymore, but they are still very supportive for Ginger and Carl. So yeah, there's still a story that we have yet to know about.
I could probably chalk it up to financial troubles and, the commitment that both of them would need to have for the sake of their children. But, for Jonas, it's sort of like, maybe he got into this whole marriage thing without properly thinking of the implications of what is going to occur until it's too late. And this is something he had to learn the extremely hard way.
Possibly, you're right. I mean, again, we don't really know for sure, but that's a pretty interesting theory. Maybe they were just too young and naive to understand about like how much of taking care of a family is. I mean, we knew that Lois was training up to be a nurse, and especially with the amount of hours that she has to put in, and maybe Jonas was going in between jobs, because we knew in an Even Steven Holiday special that he was working as a Santa, but that's not like a full-time job. So I'm sure he was like going in between jobs, and maybe he couldn't like keep a steady job so that they can support the family. So maybe there was just
Yeah.
a lot of things that was going on that Lois was saying, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, I think the professional commitments really did cause a strain on both Jonas's and Lois's marriage. I think it really makes me realize that their professional priorities were also playing a huge part in not only their collective lives, but also what was going to occur with their children. I mean, we kind of understand that because Lois was trained to be a nurse, and because of Lois's profession as a nurse, we kind of understand that Carl's fascination of the macabre would probably see him going into something that involves deceased bodies, like a mortician, or anything that has to do with working in the morgue.
Right.
I think I do want to give a shout out to the nurses' strike, just solidarity, good labor rights issue of the show, good showing the struggle of like working class people and the need for class consciousness. And I thought that was a really good episode for Lois and Ginger's relationship as mother and daughter, but also just a good way to show the material reality of Lois's job in a comprehensive way.
Yeah, that's definitely a good one for sure. All right. So yeah, I guess now we can go now. I guess we can finish off with moments. So yeah, I think that, moments in the show that really, are very impactful for me, other than like stuff from like Little Seal Girl. I mean, anything with Macy is definitely like a highlight for me, whether it be like, conquering her fear of watching the video from, like when she was watching the video for the first time, from Gym Class Confidential, where she was like, I have to watch this in order for me to like pass PE. So she was like learning about the changes of a woman's body, and she was like really nervous about it. And, there was a nice correlation with Hoodsy, where he was going through very similar issues, where he was afraid to taking a shower after gym class. And, another one with Macy is definitely family therapy, where she is finally getting the attention that she was craving from her parents, because they're always so busy being child psychologists. So now that but the problem is that she's treated like a 4-year-old, and so they're giving her like this petting zoo themed party, and everybody's like, well, she's turning 13 years old. It's like, shouldn't she have like a cool party? Because we saw a comparison with Mipsy, where she and Macy had the same birthday, and Mipsy had like, this karaoke, and a sushi chef was coming on by, and the clouds were being formed to spell out happy birthday Mipsy, and the playing. And so
sorry, can we talk about just for a second? I want to shout out to Mipsy, a character who is just the devil. Like Miranda gets like episodes to deepen her character arc and like give us more like shading to her. Not Mipsy. Mipsy's just evil. Mipsy's just mean.
Mipsy's a bad cat. I'm gonna say it there. She's a bad
Mipsy
cat.
was put on this earth to cause problems, and I love her for it.
She has claws of steel.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that, Mipsy was kind of like the lead-in towards not only, the episode of, Far From Home, or Fat Lays on Ice, where she was the one who called her cousin saying, hey, convince Ginger to stay in this academy so that we can get her away. And also the fact that, her and Miranda were the ones who were responsible for vandalizing the statue at Lucky Junior High. It's like, Mipsy doesn't get in trouble for this. It's Miranda who gets most of the blame. So it's like, yeah, I mean, Mipsy does say her fair share of nasty things just as much as the others. Like, she was the one who was responsible for, Ginger thinking that she was the nice girl. Or, she was like, wait, I'm a nice girl. It's like, yeah, nice girls finish last. And yeah, it's like, Yeah, I mean, Mipsy's just as much of a bad girl as Miranda, even though that she doesn't get the same amount of time on the screen as Miranda. Because if you remember from season 3, when she threw the rock in, Dodie's window to try to get her attention in About Face, and then she ends up with an eye patch throughout the entire series at that point. So, and then we barely get to see her in Lucky High. In fact, we barely get to see a lot of the characters in Lucky High. Not as much as Miranda. A little bit of Courtney here and there, but yeah, I mean, it was mostly focusing on like Ginger, Dodie, Macy, and Darren. So yeah, Mipsy doesn't get as much attention as maybe she should have. I think that would be really interesting if we would have gotten more Mipsy centric episodes.
I don't know really, because the way I see Mipsy is that while Miranda is sort of the quote unquote alpha bitch, it just seems like Mipsy is just as bad. I mean, Miranda might have had her moments, like if you remember the band episode, the band episode.
You're talking about Ginger Solo.
Oh yes, that's the one. I mean, that was Miranda's shining moment.
Yes,
absolute shining moment. Whereas with Mipsy, I don't think she even had any shining moment.
Not really, no.
The only shining moments she has are probably when she gets what's coming to her, like when she ended up with that eye patch. And I think the only ones that she has are probably some lines that might be kind of fun to listen to, but I'm going to say this. Mipsy is just freaking catty all around. That's what I mean by when I say that Mipsy's such a bad cat. Oh, and lest I forget, she has a viper's tongue.
Yeah. So I think that other moments that I can definitely remember, I mean, the Carl and Hoodsey plots were definitely like the really, really wild ones. I mean, every time that they go full capitalist, as Casey Reed from the Friday Night Nicktoons podcast like to say, where they just go out and they try to do things that they try to make money for whatever reason. It's definitely like a highlight. Like when they started off the food cart and they started selling out gross themed foods. That was definitely like a really hilarious one. And the only reason why people still remember No Hope for Courtney was when Mrs. Gordon was retiring and Carl and Hoodsey tried to win her back. And so they tried to put this party together. And so they tried to, Carl was performing, this musical number where, singing to Mrs. Gordon, please come back. We miss you and we want you back. And, I promise I won't be as bad to you anymore. So yeah, anything with Carl and Hoodsey is great. And even like the more serious moments, like with even Stephen Holiday special where Carl was talking to Jonas and, Jonas is telling him, hey, come on in. And then Carl says, my mom says I shouldn't get inside the car with a stranger. So yeah, that was a harsh moment there. And even with like the 10 chairs where Carl was even saying more things to Jonas in terms of like, the fact that he wasn't even happy that he came over for Thanksgiving. So yeah, I mean, Carl has his good moments and he also has his bad moments. But at the end, they are what you would expect to see in a kid, especially a kid who is very, high strung and, into his ways and definitely very mature and smart for his age. So yeah, I think that even with like Courtney, all the lines that she would say in this show are so hilarious. Like, she would talk about how, things would be really strange. Like, she thought that Ginger's vacuum cleaner was a robot. And, she was like asking questions about like, why would they put, the children's caps, safety tips for them not to open, or, trying to get, Ginger, Dodie, and Macy very excited about going over to the fair, even though that Ginger was having arguments with Darren. So yeah, I mean, even stuff with, Courtney is always a highlight. And of course with Lois is always a highlight as well, with her great advice and her sense of humor. So yeah, all of it is just great. And, those are moments that I definitely do treasure.
Yeah, I think speaking of Courtney, I think after what happened in Wicked Game, I would just say this. Ginger should have just dumped Dodie altogether and just stuck with Courtney. I think that would have made a whole lot more sense, because this also correlates nicely to what I was saying about childhood friends don't always equal to the friends that you're going to have as a grown-up, because it was sort of inevitable that friendships were going to change, friendship dynamics are going to change, and relationship dynamics were going to inevitably change. Let's face it. Ginger, Macy, Dodie, Courtney, Miranda, Mipsy, Darren, and many of the other kids from lucky junior high, we're about to approach high school. The chances of certain friendships remaining are not going to be that huge. In fact, they're going to be slim. I just had to put it out there because let's face it, Courtney is a much more genuine friend than, Macy and Dodie could ever be in that very moment.
Yeah, that's for sure. I mean, I know that a lot of people have, their debates about like, who's the worst character in the show? Is it Miranda? Is it Mipsy? Or is it Dodie? I've seen this so many times online. It's not even funny. I mean, I even see Dodie being put up in the same group as like some of the worst characters featured in any animated show, which it's hard to say because I know a lot of people have their hatred towards Dodie, and even I pointed it out that some of my least favorite episodes feature Dodie, but I think that there are some moments in which Dodie does have her time to shine, like About Face, in which she's talking to her mom, where she was saying, stop pretending to be cool, mom, and hanging out with these popular girls. It's like, what do you have to prove in doing so? It doesn't matter about like, popularity. It just be yourself, even though that she doesn't really take it to heart in season 3, but that's beside the point. But still, I mean, I think that, there's some moments, I mean, I think with all the characters, I mean, of course, except for Mipsy, but with Courtney, with Miranda, and even with Dodie, they all have their moments, and they're flawed characters, but they all have their shining moments where they actually do redeem themselves.
True. I also read a lot of discourses revolving around Dodie saying that she's so hateable, she's so despicable. But then again, she's had her moments where she did act really irritably. But at the same time, she's also had her moments where she had those moments of humanity. I mean, losing Nana Bishop is a highlight for her.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned about Face, so it is very unfair to say that Dodie is utterly loathsome. I understand. She is self-centered. She is kind of a spoiled brat. And she does constantly act without even thinking for even a millisecond. But then again, maybe it's also a sobering reminder that there will always be people within our friendship circle or in our relationship circle that will tend to act like Dodie, and maybe we might even know a Dodie in our lives, but that doesn't mean that they're completely hateable or overly manipulative or just plain nasty. Dodie is just someone who has her dark sides and sort of light sides as well, but it seems like the discourse revolving around Dodie is mostly focused on having all of her nastier, uglier, more loathsome characteristics exposed and therefore exaggerated in the most hyperbolic way possible.
Right. Now, what do you guys think, Ryan and Brooke? I'm genuinely curious about your thoughts on this.
Yeah, there's a lot of times where Dodie just frustrates me.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Brooke.
Yeah, but I really like Baxter, with her mom, and seeing more of like Joanne's insecurities and how they have been pushed on to Dodie.
Yeah, you're right. I think that Joanne is definitely a major reason why that Dodie is the way she is. I mean, she can be very, very mean, especially over towards Carl, where she doesn't want Hoodie to hang out with him. And also the fact that she can be really pushy and into her ways. And if something doesn't happen the way that she wants it, she starts breaking apart. It was, you saw in Lunatic Lake, in which even so much as like, oh, there's a policeman that's blocking the way. It's like, oh, but I didn't call for him to be in the way. Now we're going to be behind schedule. It's like, you can't control that, And so, yeah, I think that's partially the reason why Dodie is the way she is because of her mother.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing that kind of disturbs me about Joanne. I mean, there are moments where she can be very judgmental, acerbic, and there's just so much acid and animosity just dripping from her tongue. She might have moments of humanity, but I think we all remember Joanne for her venomous acid dripping tongue whenever she sees Carl, or whenever she like attempts to make a scene over something that is otherwise benign at best.
Yeah, I think this is what the show does really well with its adult characters. I think like by contrast, in like Fairly Odd Parents, where the parents are like pretty one note and kind of foolish. Like that's what Ginger paints with the same amount of detail for adults and kids alike. They're all individuals, and they're all people, and also this also sort of parallels how Ginger and Carl are shaped by Lois and conspicuous by his absence, Jonas. Like kids internalize their environments. Kids are the products of where they're raised, and as well as their own individual identities. And I think the show is always smart to be like, okay, we have a kid, we know what they're like, how did this happen? They write backwards from that. And this is also like Courtney's parents fill in these gaps. This is also like whenever we learn from anyone's home life, it tracks and makes sense how they are the way they are. And I think that is a little testament of like detail that they always had in mind for everybody, regardless of age.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think that another thing that we definitely need to talk about is now this show didn't really get as much attention compared to the other Klasky Csupo Nicktoons that came out around the same time, or even any of the other Nicktoons that came out around the same time. I mean, around the 2000s, you had shows such as, Ginger, of course, and then you had The Fairly Odd Parents, Invader Zim, Chalk Zone, The Danny Phantom, My Life as a Teenage Robot, Avatar: The Last Airbender, various others. But yeah, Ginger didn't really seem to get as much attention. And even with like All Grown Up, it was even more of a successful, slice of life cartoon featuring preteens more than Ginger was. Why do you think that is? I mean, I know for you, Ryan, you couldn't watch it because, your parents didn't allow you to watch it from that first episode.
But I don't think Footloose-esque censorship is why it didn't catch on as much. I think that what it is like, I mean, I was told by Ginger was very like character focused and very like low on the hijinks outside of the errant Carl and Hoodsey plot. I mean, that's what Ginger does have a psychic girl and does have the ghost of Maud and does have like a mummified eyeball in a few episodes, but that's not like what it's about. And where every other show that you mentioned, like Chalk Zone or Fairly Odd Parents or what have you, is like yelling at the top of its lungs, like cartoon silliness, like Looney Tunes-esque shenanigans, as told by Ginger, is taking things much more intentionally and much more sort of like naturalistically to like give these slices of life pictures. All Grown Up, of course, had the cultural franchise recognition of being the Rugrats sequel, so that sort of made it sort of gave it some platform shoes to stand on, so it couldn't be without an audience. What it makes me think of, as told by Ginger, is like King of the Hill, which is a different clientele, but both those shows are very like narrative focused, very character focused, and really could be live action in the way their scripts are written, more or less. The animation gives characters like distinct designs and distinct personalities that couldn't be done in real life, but the characters act in such a grounded, down-to-earth way that they are more or less like animated like living room dramas, if that makes sense.
Sure, I can see where you're coming from. Yeah, I think that the fact that Ginger was definitely like, it felt like it was like definitely the odd one that was sticking out. I had an interview with Eric Molinski, who was one of the storyboard artists on Ginger, and we talked about this during an episode discussion of Lunatic Lake, where he was telling stories about how they would bring in test groups of like boys and girls, and how they would react to these shows. And they told, according to the higher ups of Nickelodeon, when he heard back from what they were saying, and he said that the girls really loved the Ginger plots, but they felt that the Carl and Hoodsey plots felt out of place. And the boys said, well, we love Carl and Hoodsey, but why are they stuck on this girls show? And so Nickelodeon didn't know exactly how to market As Told by Ginger for a more mainstream audience. And because it was much more serious than, say, like Fairly Odd Parents or any of those the live action or those action-packed shows like My Life as a Teenage Robot or Danny Phantom. It's like, well, they were kind of like in a pickle, saying like, okay, we have this show that's definitely has like a split in terms of like how the show is structured, and it's not a show that we can be able to like easily market, because if you remember, like I don't know if you guys know, but there was barely any As Told by Ginger merchandise. Like there was not a lot of like t-shirts or journals or video games or any of the such. So yeah, I mean, it was kind of like a hard show to sell. And so I guess when around the same time in which when Klasky, Csupo, and Nickelodeon were kind of like, their contract ran out of, their exclusivity of doing a lot of their shows with them, I guess a lot of their, that's kind of like the reason why As Told by Ginger kind of like ended its run, and why a lot of the episodes didn't air on TV. Like a lot of people don't even remember like the high school episodes, if you remember, like Detention or Dodie's Big Break or any of the stuff. Most people that I remember, when they said, I didn't even know that As Told by Ginger continued on. I thought that the graduation episode was the last episode. So yeah, I mean, even still to this day, like other than watching it like old YouTube videos, As Told by Ginger was a hard show to like find officially until they released it on Paramount Plus just a few months ago. So the fact that Ginger was such a hard show, even when it first came out, which is why I think that a lot of people just didn't really gravitate it too much. It's like, for boys, it's like, I don't want to watch this girls show. And for the girls, I'm sure they got into it, but maybe for some of them, they were like, oh, it's too, the girls are too old or too young for me. I can't really relate to this. And I think that's why, Ginger was kind of like, in my opinion, kind of like push off on the side. And so I'm glad that nowadays we get to appreciate it for what it is.
I think it's also just how As Told by Ginger was marketed. Because remember, this was released around the same time as SpongeBob SquarePants, even though it was released a year ago. So you can definitely tell that viewers were not really prepared to expect something different like As Told by Ginger. And with every consecutive new release of newer Nicktoons, such as Fairly Odd Parents and many of the other shows that became well-established Nicktoons and therefore became more well-known, it just seemed like As Told by Ginger was not the type of cartoon that could guarantee sales in toys, sales in merchandise. I mean, growing up, I could only remember that the only piece of As Told by Ginger merchandise was in the form of comics and mostly in the form of books. Because as you mentioned, Patricia, in your Why As Told by Ginger Needs to Be Rediscovered video, you stated that As Told by Ginger is one of those shows where the characters consistently changed clothing, because as opposed to many other standalone cartoons, the characters would be in the same clothes because of marketing, whereas As Told by Ginger, it's a completely different case. So there is that sort of marketing that's going on, but also how it was being advertised by Nickelodeon. We also have to be aware that the flagship shows during the time As Told by Ginger was airing were Rugrats, SpongeBob SquarePants, and Fairly Odd Parents, yes. We also could add in Hey Arnold into it, which I would also consider to be its brother series, but there's no doubt that the comedic Nicktoons were the ones that were gaining steam. I just don't think that a lot of us viewers were prepared for a show like As Told by Ginger, something that was more than just a sum of its parts. And that's saying something, because when you're dealing with a show that deals with topics like addiction or peer pressure, or even the line that is going to be crossed between life and death, that's something that a lot of us viewers were not prepared for. Sure, Hey Arnold, and even to some extent Doug, did kind of lead us into that with some of those topics, with Hey Arnold coming out on top. But As Told by Ginger was the cartoon, or should I say Nicktoon, that dared to challenge our perception of what is Western animation. That notion will be further challenged by Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is more action-packed. But As Told by Ginger, I just don't think a lot of us were prepared to witness something like this. We were just not prepared. But it also is correlated with how Nickelodeon was treating this show. And even in its later seasons, it was treated quite badly. So there is that contentiousness or contention that the network has with this show, but it's also with how it was run, how it was advertised, and how it stood out among the mainstream shows from Nickelodeon because of not so much advertising. But just because something is advertised several times doesn't mean it's always going to be great. As Told by Ginger wasn't advertised, let alone merchandised in several occasions, but it still managed to have something that's shown with viewers who tuned into it, despite the complications in releases, despite delayed releases, despite all the trouble that As Told by Ginger underwent. It's still shown in its own special way.
Yeah, it does show it in its own special way. And I think that, I even made a video about this last week where I talked about how the importance of slice of life animation. And I even made a discussion about like, has slice of life animation kind of like gone away? Did it like completely disappear? And I even, talked about like a theory that maybe it didn't, it just evolved. Like maybe it was just incorporated into like other type of shows. So I mean, I thought that maybe like, the seriousness that we see in like various animated shows nowadays that we see in like She-Ra, or we see in Amphibia or The Owl House or Adventure Time, in which like they were able to take some dramatic elements that you would see in stuff like As Told by Ginger and incorporate it into like, their own type of shows. And they're able to like tell the stories just as strongly. And even with like the rise of slice of life, we're still getting that today. We had Clarence, or we currently have the Loud House, and we have Craig of the Creek. So it's still there. It's just that people need to see that they're still important. And I mean, I've heard some people say that Big Mouth is also another one, but I haven't seen the show. I've heard some mixed reviews about it. It's like saying, it goes into like the discussion of puberty, but it tells it in a much more grounded way, sort of. But again, I haven't seen the show, so I don't know. So I think that maybe, the stuff that As Told by Ginger was doing, I guess it was just a little too ahead of its time for an animated show. And so I guess that's kind of why one of the reasons why it kind of like, didn't exactly catch on for a lot of kids. So
yeah, but lest we forget, it also has something to do with the scheduling. I mean, how Nickelodeon scheduled As Told by Ginger, I mean, I can't always wrap my head around it. At the same time, it's also because it was kind of petering out again. I mean, to have a show like As Told by Ginger peter out against the likes of SpongeBob SquarePants or Fairly Odd Parents, it's like saying, sorry, you don't have too much of a chance.
Yeah, it's hard to say, but anyway, but I think that I'm glad to see now that a lot of people are covering this show and are looking back on it with appreciation. And that's what really makes me happy, to be quite honest. And yeah, I think that if I would say, for anybody who's listening and want to like tune in to like watching an episode of As Told by Ginger. Now, I'm actually curious, for all of you guys. Now, what would you say would be like, if you want somebody to like know about As Told by Ginger, about like some of the best things that it has to feature, what would be the one episode that you would recommend them to watch?
Honestly, the pilot. I think start at the start. I think the pilot is a great thesis statement on what As Told by Ginger is as a show, and I think that's a great place to just get in on the ground floor.
Okay, that's a good one.
That's a great one. I think to really like get in on, and cover a lot of the episodes that As Told by Ginger goes into, I think Cry Wolf is a great one. because we've got a lot about like Ginger growing up, and then, you know, even a little bit of dissonance with Lois and some great Lois moments. I'm also a huge fan of Lois. And then you've got a lot of fun stuff with Carl in that one too. So I think it really encompasses a lot of the strengths of the show.
Yeah, I would definitely have as a first introduction, Hello Stranger, I think would be a great first introduction episode because it really shows off the goofiness with Carl and Hoodsey. You know, the Carl and Hoodsey plot is about like, you know, Carl and Hoodsey trying to win a bet against Brandon so that they can be able to win his pet monkey. And then, you know, he ends up getting bitten by the monkey. And so he ends up kind of like turning into a monkey himself. So you got the funny part, but then you got the serious part in which when, you know, Ginger's trying to enter this poetry contest. And so she wants to find out what would be a good poem to write about, and then she starts getting a letter from her father, and so then she starts writing a poem about him, and it's like one of the best moments that has happened in the entire series. And if you want to know about the gist of like how Ginger is in terms of like being both serious and fun, I think that's a great one to start with.
As for me, I would definitely have to go with a tie between Hello Stranger and She Was Gone, because although we know that the show is capable of having really strong characters, especially the side characters, this is ultimately Ginger's show and how she sees the world around her, how she sees growing up, and how she perceives family, and how she perceives, well, everything around her. Hello Stranger deals with her relationship with her estranged father while also balancing out with some of the hilarious moments between Carl, Hoodsey, and Brandon. And from what I could witness from Hello Stranger, it definitely made me feel not only for Ginger, but also the family, because the memories they have of Jonas, the biological father, is extremely limited at best. And well, it also makes me realize that it is a poignant moment, especially for Ginger when she was reading that poem, because, well, despite her receiving that belated 6th grade graduation letter from her father, she still wants to get to know him a lot better, despite him, well, walking out of the family. And she still sees him as family. She still sees him as her father. And She Was Gone, it also helps to demonstrate to the viewers that this can tread on more serious topics like depression. And of course, when you think of writing poetry, sometimes the strongest pieces of writing come from a dark place, and She Was Gone demonstrates that. In fact, both Hello Stranger and She Was Gone have inspired me to love the process of writing. It doesn't matter what I do, whether I write blog entries or write poetry, or what I mean by blog entries is the demotivational and motivational posters, or writing about all my favorite shows, and hopefully turning these passions that I have into something that I could do professionally, like journalism, or writing columns as a profession, or writing for some big magazine company specializing in music and entertainment. I figured out that these episodes definitely made me appreciate writing a whole lot more. And I'm sure that for anyone who loves writing and therefore appreciates the craft of creating something that could make readers interested, I could definitely recommend these two episodes because not only do they feature a person like Ginger who is a writer herself and therefore has grown up to be one, but they also help us contextualize everything that Ginger is going through, whether it be with her friends or her family or what is going on within her. They serve as a fine gateway to Ginger's perception of the world around her. And I have these two episodes to thank from the bottom of my heart.
Absolutely. Yeah, those are definitely the more classic episodes that a lot of people remember. And those two out of the three, including Lunatic Lake, also were nominated for Primetime Emmys because of that. So yeah, now I actually have a few more questions right before we wrap things up. So now we know if you've been seeing that the direction that Nickelodeon's been going through lately in terms of, they want to bring stuff back. I mean, we saw that with Hey Arnold with the Jungle movie. We saw that with Rocko's Modern Life with Static Cling and Enter the Florpus. Are You Afraid of the Dark had 2 seasons of revivals in terms of like telling different stories with different members of the Midnight Society. And, even with like, Legends of the Hidden Temple, even though it's not Nickelodeon, but they did bring it back for the CW, but it's leaning more towards adults. And there's talks about like Comedy Central even bringing back, shows such as like Ren and Stimpy and Daria and Beavis and Butthead for a more older audience. Now, do you think that at some point, with 90s nostalgia, maybe it'll start going away out of the mainstream and then 2000s nostalgia would take over? Do you think that we'll ever see a reboot or a TV movie of As Told by Ginger? And if so, what would you like to see happen?
I'm a little conflicted on this one. I think I loved As Told by Ginger so much that I would love to see like a reboot or a continuation, but I also love it in its current form too. So there's the conflict there. If they were to reboot it, and I think that the way they're going with what they're doing, I don't necessarily think that they would do this. But I would love to see Ginger, and like Ginger's college years or Ginger as 20 something. I think that would be so cool to see how her life develops, especially seeing where it ends up, in the wedding frame. To see the in-betweens of that, I think would be really interesting.
I hope they don't. I'd watch it if they did bring it back. I would be curious, but I think that like As Told by Ginger told its story, it told it well, and then it closed up shop when the story was done. And like we got a good closure, even if it was a little rushed at the end, maybe with like that flash forward and like the snap redemption of Darren. But I just think that like when these shows get brought back, it's like Pet Cemetery. Like sometimes dead is better. And like when a show comes back, it's been changed by the time it's been away, and we lose some of the sincere creativity of its original release, and we get this grim imitation. So I'd rather we just leave As Told by Ginger in the ground, but I would watch it if it came back.
Okay. As for me, I am conflicted as well because I saw what happened with Rugrats. They have the new reboot on Paramount Plus, and knowing that a lot of people didn't really care for the Klasky Csupo style of animation, and the fact that we're gonna have it back, but now it's gonna be CGI. It's like I cannot imagine As Told by Ginger in CGI. That does not bode well in terms of like the looks. And if they were gonna like bring it back as like a TV movie, it's like, okay, we're gonna have like a continuation of it, just like we did with the Jungle movie, Enter the Florpus and Static Cling, and we're gonna tell maybe like one more story to kind of like wrap things up. I would maybe love it if maybe we can finally like get the things that we didn't get the first time. Like, okay, we saw now Dr. Dave and Lois are married, and now they are going over to this brand new house. We know that Courtney is completely broke, and we know that, Ginger and Carl are going to be having a little bit more money than they ever have. And we know that Ginger is still dating Orion, and we know that Darren is still dating Simone. But what happened in between that and the flash forward that we saw at the last bits of the episode? I mean, I would be genuinely curious if maybe we can get like, Ginger finishing off with high school and maybe going over to college, and then maybe her and Orion maybe fall off, or maybe Ginger wants to go back with Darren or something. I have no idea. But I think that it will be really interesting if we get that. But as for a reboot, I don't think so. I mean, I know that there are some things about the show that are kind of like steep into the 2000s pop culture, but there's still a lot of things like the messages and the way that the characters are and the lessons that they taught are still timeless. And I think that they would still work with today's kids. So yeah, I'm definitely conflicted as well in terms of like a reboot TV movie. I mean, I would love to see that if it's possible, but only if they do it right. I mean, only if they did, kind of like what they did with the Jungle movie, Static Cling, and Enter the Florpus, in which not only did they bring back the old people who worked on it, but they also brought back new people who grew up with watching the shows respectfully and are able to put in their own spin on it. So I think that'll be great if they could, but if they don't, then yeah, I think we could just leave it be and, just have As Told by Ginger the way it is for now.
I'm kind of in a place of contention at the moment when it comes to rebooting As Told by Ginger. I would kind of like to see a continuation of it, of what occurred between what happened at the end of the wedding frame and the time skip, because there were not many resolutions that were in full fruition. I could recommend you guys a piece of fan fiction that I spotted on fanfiction.net that detailed the events that happened, like how Carl and Noel got back together, how Orion ended up politely breaking up with Ginger, and then Ginger ended up going back with Darren, and how Orion ended up still being friends with Ginger and ended up being friends with Darren, all that stuff. And I forgot the name of it, but eventually I'll probably search for it right now, and I will proclaim the name of it. As for a reboot of As Told by Ginger, I don't think a reboot is that possible, because it's sort of captured the time period, because what worked back in the 2000s is not going to work today. It might end, because there will be some references that are not going to hold up by today's standards. And sometimes you run the risk of alienating one audience member. Oh, here it is. Here's the fan fiction I was talking about. The Wedding Frame, The True Ending, written by W. Wolf L. This was published back in, hang on a second. Yeah, published back in 2011. So give it a read if you haven't. And it would be very interesting if we were to have seen what happened between that and the marriage, because looking back at The Wedding Frame and how it ended, it was quite rushed. I mean, there were certain characters that deserved a proper comeuppance. There were certain resolutions that needed to be made. So a continuation would have been nice. But as for a reboot, not really. I mean, it's fine the way it is, because let's also face the facts. There are many older properties that deserve a fresher coat of paint by today's standards. Take, for example, Space Sentinels. Only people who grew up in the 70s heard of it, but who's heard of it these days? I don't think a lot of millennials, let alone Gen Z's, even heard of that show, but that's entirely beside the point, and it would be a topic that I would wholeheartedly cover one day. As for As Told by Ginger, I think it does deserve a continuation of Ginger's adult life, how she and Carl managed to probably have a firmer bond as siblings and therefore respect each other a lot more, because in the show proper, it seemed like they were distant at best. So it would be really great to see a further development of where they were to go from there.
Yeah,
Like Ginger
because
continuing high school.
yeah, exactly.
like-
Because we see in a lot more shows nowadays where the siblings have a much more closer relationship. I mean, I don't know about you, but I remember like back in the the 90s and 2000s, you had like every time there was like a sibling, it's like they always had like this, you know, this rivalry, or it's like, oh, you're being annoying. So
Oh, definitely.
so yeah, I think that, you know, shows like Phineas and Ferb and Gravity Falls, in which like, hey, you have these siblings that can actually get along with each other.
Oh,
What?
definitely.
So,
Yeah, I think that would have been I think that would have been great to see the continuation, and therefore, you know, see Ginger and Carl's sibling dynamic improve a lot more. And maybe to even some extent, you know, have, you know, Dodie's and Hoodsy's sibling relationship improve a lot more, and therefore break down the walls of distance at best and animosity at worst, and therefore see each other as equals and human beings, even to the point where Hoodsy could finally admit to Macy that he was her secret admirer, and therefore finally realized that, you know, it doesn't matter how old or how young they are, they've all endured similar trials and tribulations, and therefore they can help each other to grow as human beings and
right.
even find their ways in lives no matter where they are.
Well, yeah, there you go. I think I want to end things off by, you know, giving final thoughts. So yeah, what are your final thoughts of As Told by Ginger, especially since, you know, you guys are online content creators, whether you do it videos or podcasts. So, you know, especially since I know that you guys have talked about it in the past. So, you know, for anybody who's tuning in and listening, so what would you say were your final thoughts of the show be?
Brooke's having some internet trouble, so I don't know if she'll be able to make it back before we finish. But I speaking on behalf of both of us from our show, Nation of Animation, I'll say that I think our final thoughts on As Told by Ginger is that it is like an extremely of its time look at like stories about young people, about young adults and like teens and preteens that is incredibly thorough in its like humaneness and its nuance and its characters, and really worth remembering and revisiting consistently and frequently. It deserves a seat at the table of like great all-time cartoons.
Yeah, and I think that I would definitely do agree that I'm really sad that you know, a lot of people kind of like push As Told by Ginger toward the side when it comes to like what would be considered to be like one of the definitive de facto Nicktoons. I think that the thing that I remember a lot of people you know, complaining about was like there was this one person who posted like a ranking table or whatever, saying like, okay, these are low tier, these are god tier, these are mid tier, whatever, and they put As Told by Ginger in the low tier, and there was a lot of people who were genuinely upset about it, saying like, you know, you don't give As Told by Ginger enough credit or something like that. So again, even though this is that person's opinion, I'm not going to say anything bad about it, but yeah, I'm kind of happy that people are kind of like giving acknowledgement of As Told by Ginger, but still it's not like up there in terms of like, you know, people that when they think of Nicktoons, they think of that immediately. I mean, even with like Klasky Csupo, I mean, everybody thinks about Rugrats or Rocket Power or the Wild Thornberries or Our Real Monsters, even more so than As Told by Ginger. So I'm really hoping that now with Paramount Plus and Amazon Prime having As Told by Ginger in its complete episode format, that many people can be able to look back into it and they can be able to see what the show was able to do and you know, what it was able to deliver. And I think that when they see the episodes and they saw the risks that it took and they saw the characters that were portrayed and the episodes that it had, so I think that you know, once they give the show a chance, I think they'll see that the show is amazing and that it does definitely deserve a lot more credit than what it's given. So yeah, that's what I have to say.
I agree with both of you guys. I think As Told by Ginger is a show that definitely deserves a lot more props. If you remember my series of Nicktoon reviews that I did 6 years ago during my summer break, there was sort of a reason why I started off with Hey Arnold, and then came As Told by Ginger, and then came Avatar: Last Airbender. Because those three were what I consider to be my top 3 most favorite Nicktoons of all time, with Hey Arnold acquiring the bronze medal, As Told by Ginger acquiring the silver medal, and Avatar: Last Airbender coming out on top with the gold. Now, when it comes to As Told by Ginger, I just wish that it continues to have a whole lot more love than it already has, because the common discourse when it comes to favorite Nicktoons would usually be centered on SpongeBob, and especially to those who have grown up as either millennials or Gen Zs, a lot of them think about SpongeBob, but there is this whole repertoire of, unless they forget about Fairly Odd Parents, that's also part of the discourse. But there's a whole repertoire of Nicktoons that just seem to be either forgotten or not as talked about. And I'm just as glad to see a lot of younger viewers and people who have grown up with this show and therefore have recapitulated just how much they enjoyed As Told by Ginger, just express how much the show has meant to them, regardless of how young or how old they are. So it's really great to see As Told by Ginger continue to gain steam in the amount of love that it so rightfully deserves. And I want to continue spreading that love. I just hope that there will also be other people who will continue spreading that love to As Told by Ginger. And here's a lot more encouragement to Emily Kapnick to continue making shows of this ilk, because it's not every day that you see cartoons tackle serious issues. Too many times viewers would, or shall I say people in general, would demean cartoons as something that's meant for kids. Well, we've gone past that, and we definitely have As Told by Ginger to thank.
Yeah, I think we do as well. We definitely do have a lot to thank for As Told by Ginger for what it did. So yeah, I just want to thank you guys for coming on by to the podcast. I really do appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It was great.
Yeah, so why don't you guys plug and promote your stuff?
All right. You can find the show at Cartoon Book Club on Twitter and Instagram. Nation of Animation was too long, would not fit. You can find me on Twitter at Ryan with Cheese. You can find Brooke on Twitter at the Brooke Smith on Twitter. You can follow us there, and please listen wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, Antoni?
All right, so y'all can find me on YouTube, where I post my reviews and singing videos and the like. And you can find me on DeviantArt. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook. And yeah, I'm just that type of guy who's got a lot of content to offer for you. And I'm not going to stop from here.
All right. And as for me, you can find me on youtube.com/oldsschoollane, facebook.com/oldsschoollane, or should I say meta.com that they're calling it now. I have no idea anymore. You could, I don't get it. Anyway, you can find me on Twitter at Patty_B_Miranda. You can check out the podcast on Anchor, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, many places. New episodes of my podcast will go there first, and then they'll go up in a few days on YouTube. So thank you so much for listening, everyone. Let us know in the comments below about your memories of As Told by Ginger. Who are your favorite characters? What are your favorite moments? What are your favorite episodes? And let us know if you're interested in seeing As Told by Ginger come back as a reboot, or maybe a TV movie revival, or you just want to leave the show alone. It had its run. It was good. So thank you so much, everyone. Hope to see you around soon, and take care.
See ya.
Bye, everybody.